Okay, we're back to Sanhedrin Perek Gimel. We learned previously Mishnah Gimel, and I realized that I didn't finish it. At the end, there was an additional comment. At the end of Mishnah Gimel, there was an additional comment, there was an additional point made by Rabbi Yehuda. We learned in the Mishnah that gamblers, that is, dice players, pigeon racers, are disqualified to be dayonim or edim. So the Mishnah adds that this disqualification does not apply universally to all gamblers. What does that mean? Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Masai, when are gamblers possible? When are gamblers ineligible? Bizman shein lehem umnus elahi, when they have no other occupation other than gambling. That is, they sit in Atlantic City full time. But if they have an occupation besides gambling, if they have an occupation other than gambling, then they are eligible. Then they are ksherim. Gamblers are posul edus only if it's a full-time occupation. A gambler is disqualified because he contributes nothing to society, we said. And therefore, if he also has a trade, a profession, a job that benefits society in some way, then he's not disqualified. That was the end of Mishnah Gimel. Now we continue on with Mishnah Daled, a very well-known Mishnah that lists all the psulim that are kroivim. Ve'elu heina kroivim. A person is disqualified to judge or to serve as a witness about a close relative. A korov is posul le'edus, as well as a korov is posul to serve as a dayan. So the Mishnah lists relatives that are included in this restriction. The kroivim that are considered those that would render someone to be posul le'edus or posul le'dayanus. Ve'elu heina kroivim. These are the relatives that a person cannot judge or testify about. So the Mishnah goes ahead and gives us the list. Aviv ve'ochiv ve'achi aviv ve'achi imoy. His father, his brother, his father's brother, and his mother's brother. Weiter of the Mishnah. Ubal achoisoi, ubal achois aviv, ubal achois imoy. Ubal imoy, the husband of his sister, the husband of his father's sister, the husband of his mother's sister, the husband of his mother, who is, of course, not his natural father. V'chomiv v'gisoy. V'chomiv, that's his father-in-law. V'gisoy, a gis, is his brother-in-law. That is, the husband of his wife's sister. Hein ubneyen v'chasneyen. They, meaning the people listed above, their sons and their sons-in-law are all included in the restriction. And v'chol goy levadoi, his stepson, that means the son of his wife, alone is included, but not his stepson's son or son-in-law, which means chogoy levadoi, his stepson alone, not stepson's son, not son-in-law of his stepson. So let's enhance this list by trying to understand some of the basic yisodos here that the Torah reveals. A person cannot judge or testify about his relative either in his favor or against him. Furthermore, two relatives cannot serve as dayanim on the same court, nor can two relatives serve as edim together. These rules, these halachas apply both to capital cases, to dina nefoshes, as well as to dina mamonos. There's no difference, right? Two brothers can't serve as edim. Two brothers can't serve as dayonim. Not the dina nefoshes, not in dina mamonos. Now, the Torah in Devarim Chav Daled states, "Avos shall not be put to death. Avos yumsu albonim. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their sons, nor shall sons be put to death because of their fathers." So the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chav Zayin explains this to mean that a father may not be put to death based on the testimony or the judgment of his son, and vice versa. And the Gemara derives this. The Gemara explains further that since the Torah uses the Lashon Rabim, the plural of avos, why should it say avos? Why should it say av? So the Gemara explains that since the pasuk uses the plural of fathers, it refers to two fathers who are brothers. So the pasuk teaches that a father is disqualified from testifying not only about his own son, but also about his brother's son, that is his nephew, avos. And likewise, a son is disqualified from testifying not only about his father, but also about his father's brother, that is his uncle. So it logically follows that since a father cannot testify about his brother's son, he certainly cannot testify about the brother himself. And furthermore, by stating sons, B'Lashon Rabim in the plural, the pasuk teaches that these two sons, who are first cousins, may not testify about each other. So what comes out from the pasuk is that a person cannot testify about his father, his son, his brother, his uncle, his nephew, or his cousin. All that is rooted in the Lashon Rabim of avos and bonim. Now the Gemara also learns from the pasuk that a person cannot judge or testify about his mother or her relatives, such as her son from another marriage, a half-brother, her brother, that is his uncle, and her brother's son, that is his cousin. So although the Mishnah mentions only male relatives, versteht sich that the same applies to their female equivalents. And therefore a man cannot judge or testify about his mother, his daughter, his sister or half-sister, his aunt, his niece, or a female cousin. So in most of the Mishnah's cases, the disqualifications goes both ways. For example, although the Mishnah says only that a son cannot testify about his father, versteht sich that the opposite is also true. A father cannot testify about his son. However, this two-way disqualification does not apply to every relationship, as we see later on. These are just some additional enhancements of the basic statement of the Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Yossi. So before citing the end of the statement, the Mishnah stops for a second to teach that Tanoim of an earlier generation disagreed. With what? Omer Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Zu Mishnah Rabbi Akiva. This Mishnah, which means the previous statement that we learned, follows the view of Rabbi Akiva. Aval Mishnah Rishono, but an earlier version of the Mishnah taught doi doi uven doi doi, only relatives such as his uncle, which means the blood brother of his father or the blood brother of his mother, and his uncle's son, doi doi uben doi doi, only those are included in the restriction, which means that according to this earlier ruling, the restriction applies only to blood relatives and not those that are related merely through marriage. A very important qualification. Again, I'm going to repeat. Omer Rabbi Yossi, zu Mishnah Rabbi Akiva. Aval Mishnah Rishoina, but an earlier version of the Mishnah. Mishnah Rishoina, doi doi uben doi doi. Doi doi uben doi doi. Only relatives such as his uncle, which means the blood brother of his father or of his mother, and his uncle's son, ben doi doi, are included in the restriction, which means that according to this earlier ruling, the restriction applies only to blood relatives and not to those who are merely related through marriage. Now the Mishnah also cites the end of the first Tana statement. So the end of the first Tana statement is, "V'chol haroi liyoshoi." If anyone was a relative at the time of the event about which there is edus being given, he is disqualified. I'm sorry. V'chol haroi liyosho. Let me go back. V'chol haroi liyosho. Only one but only one who is fit to inherit a person after his death is disqualified from judging or testifying about him. Those who will not inherit him can judge or testify about him. Need to understand this a bit. That the halachas of Yerusha, the laws of inheritance, define which relatives are disqualified to judge or to testify. That is to say, that when a man dies, his property goes to his sons. If he has no sons, it goes to his daughters. If he has no sons or daughters, it goes to his father. If his father is not alive, it goes to the nearest relative of his father, starting with his father's other children, and then his father's brothers. However, it does not go to his mother, and certainly not to relatives of his mother, because a person's estate must remain in his father's family. So the Mishnah states here that anyone who stands to inherit a person's property is disqualified from testifying about that person. This implies that any relative who does not inherit a person can testify about him. So accordingly, since the relatives of his mother do not inherit him, they are eligible to testify about him. So when the Mishnah listed relatives of his mother's brother, his mother's husband, it did not mean to imply that they are disqualified to testify about him. In fact, they can testify about him, since they do not inherit him. They have no din Yerusha. Rather, the Mishnah means only that he is disqualified to testify about them. I'll add to that not only are a man's mother and her relatives ineligible to inherit him, but so is his wife and her relatives. Nevertheless, although the relatives of a man's wife, his father-in-law, his stepson, and so forth, do not inherit him, they are disqualified to judge or testify about him. Favos, because since spouses are treated as though they were the same person. The relatives of his wife are like his relatives, and as such, they cannot testify about him, even though they do not inherit him. So, that's what that is. Now, the Mishnah cites another law about the disqualification of relatives. And if anyone was a relative at the time of the event, he is disqualified from testifying about that event. He's also disqualified if he's related at the time of giving testimony, even if he was not related at the time of the event. Obviously. However, says the Mishnah, if someone was a relative through marriage, and before the event took place, he stopped being a relative. Lamoshel, his wife died. Areze kosher, he is eligible to testify about the event. For example, if a certain man was involved in an event, and the event was witnessed by his daughter's husband, then, if the daughter had died before the event took place, her husband can testify about it because he's no longer related to her father at that time. He's no longer related. If he's no longer related, you can serve as an aid. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Afilu meisa bita v'yesh lo boni mimena harei ze korov." Rabbi Yehuda says, even though his daughter died before the event took place, if her husband has children from her, he's still his father-in-law's relative and is therefore disqualified from testifying about the event. Rabbi Yehuda is choilek on the Tadakama. According to Rabbi Yehuda, although he stopped being a son-in-law because the daughter died, his wife died, when his wife died, so he's still related to her father because of the children. Because they are his father's, because they are her father's grandchildren, and therefore he's still considered, al pi halacha, says Rabbi Yehuda, a korov. But the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. We paskin that if he died, then the remaining son-in-law is no longer considered a korov. Okay? Hope you got all the complications here as well.